Okay, some quick introductions. Okay, hello everybody. This is my attempt to have some fun, hang out, and talk to friends about different topics, especially robotics and 3D printing. So today I've got David Calkins, Robogames fame, organizer, roboticist, all-around kind of cool guy, at least in my opinion.
Oh, thanks.
So, I'll let. So. I'm a roboticist. If you follow me on YouTube, Facebook, all over social media, I've been doing robotics for a long time. Legos, started with Legos, Vex. I did first mentoring, and then I think 12, 13 years ago, I came to Robogames for the first time. And
I'm pretty sure you were there in 2005.
Right.
I don't remember if you were there in 2004, which was the first one.
So if you want, David, you can give kind of a quick background of who you are, what you do, just in case nobody knows. They don't know.
I'm David Calkins, founder of Robogames, president of the Robotics Society. Nowadays, I sit at home and walk dogs.
So you're your dog walker. Cool. So I kind of get into our discussion that we kind of started there. So I've been seeing those in my news feeds. All the events for this year have basically been canceled. All the big events over, anything over 5 to 10 people, basically just been canceled. There is talk about restarting like sporting events without people. I know they're doing that in Korea with Korea baseball. So you have lots of experience in organizing big events where people participate, lots of people participate, and or you have a lots of attendance. So I'm just kind of curious about your thoughts, and I'll just let you take it away because this is your expertise area.
And oddly, you're right. I consider myself a much better expert in event planning than actually in robotics anymore. Yeah, if you just think about Robogames in terms of how much physical contact there is between contestants, the audience, everything. And that was what was great about the sport is in like a major league ball game, you don't get to go on the field and hang out with, the players, the stars or anything. But in Robogames you could, and you, for example, would be happy to show your stuff to anybody who walked in the door. Certainly from less than 6 feet, and everybody shakes hands and everybody's nice to each other. And, if you look at any of the things where they've backwards engineered some of the people who've gotten COVID, one person in one restaurant, and they could just pin it to that one restaurant, was responsible for infecting like 30 people. At any kind of large event, I mean, now you're looking at, 10-fold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold. So at Robogames, if somebody came in with COVID today, if we were doing it today, I would expect, like 10% of the attendees probably would end up with it, if not more. What's going to happen in the future? I don't know. My biggest personal fear is that COVID is already mutating, and that the COVIDs we've seen in China, Italy, and the United States are minor mutations of each other, which is why some areas have been harder struck than others with different results. I mean, I don't see all of the sample sets or anything, but it's shocking how badly hit New York was versus, say, San Francisco, Los Angeles, any other East Coast city.
And that's an interesting dynamic of the COVID. It's going to be interesting to see the experts talk about that and explain why New York got hit so hard and, like you said, California did not. That's going to be interesting to see the dynamics of how that happened.
Yeah, I just don't know, but certainly there's so many people who have gotten it without any significant, I mean, it's not like mono or something where you're only going to get it if you are hot and sweaty with somebody, or an STD. it's clearly more contagious than the flu. And I mean, I'm worried for myself because I get the flu every year, and you can hear it in my voice right now. It's not COVID. It's just regular run-of-the-mill flu. And I'm one of those people who has really bad allergies and just sucks every spring, COVID or not. So, I don't know.
It's like, because that's the other thing. So I do have allergies too. So if you had events during allergy season and somebody starts coughing, does everybody start running as fast as they can away from that person?
It's, for me, that's funny because when I walk my dogs, which I do 3 times a day, I'm usually coughing and coughing, but it's not because I have COVID, because I have a very wet cough, and so I'm hawking loogies and things like that. Charming, isn't it?
Right.
And and everybody's like, "Oh my God!" I'm like, "No, I don't have COVID. I just have really bad allergies."
Right.
And I've been hawking for, I don't know, 2 months now. It's been a pretty bad allergy, normal flu season. But your
Right.
point is very well taken. You go to the store, somebody coughs. Are they coughing because they have the regular flu, because they have COVID, or because they just have a tickle in their throat?
So, as an event planner or large events, do you think there's any liability? So if you did a large event and then one of the contestants showed up, had COVID, and then people at the event started getting COVID, and everybody said, "Oh, that's because I was at David's event." Is there a liability, or what do you think
So
about?
I had to do a lot of research on this about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when Robogames was getting bigger. Uh, and one of them is, one of the things you learn about, if you're any good, is event liability and what you're liable for and when you're liable for and not. Uh, and in event promotions, and I forget the legal term, but there's basically a presumption of harm on the part of attendees. So, and I follow this, I don't follow other sports besides robot stuff, but I followed sports after Robogames, more about the business side of the fence. And if you remember, 10, 15 years ago, there was like a little girl who was at, I think it was a New Jersey hockey game. Puck went flying, hit her in the face, and she died. It's also happened, broken baseball bats at major league games, things like that, where bystanders get critically hurt or killed because they were there. And legally speaking, the event producer is not responsible for that because there is a presumption of harm if you're going into something like a baseball or a hockey game or robo games. Now, as any lawyer will tell you, that doesn't mean you can't be sued. And so generally when you see things like that happen and there's a quick settlement, it's really we're going to write you a check which is lower than the check we write to the lawyers, which would get us off for the responsibility. And as long as, I think, disregarding the law, if event organizers and promoters are doing their best within reason, you can't really do much. Hi, Kitty. Um, you can't really do much more. So, I mean, if I get the flu at a restaurant, I'm going to say that's really on me. If I'm at a restaurant and I get food poisoning, now that's something different. So if I'm at a baseball game and a wild bat or ball smacks me in the face, it's really hard, morally speaking, not the law speaking. I mean, whose fault is that? If you're at a baseball game, the bat breaks, and it's a regular bat, it's a regular ball. It's not any intent on the part of them. If I'm putting up a combat arena and I do a shitty job of it, and a robot breaks, then it's on me. But if I've done by whatever authority body would view that sort of thing. But if I've done my job of making sure that the arena is as fit as possible, and then something breaks and goes through it, you know, legally speaking, historically, it wouldn't be on me. Now, I'd be liable if I did a shoddy job of putting the arena together, or the crew would put a shoddy job of putting the arena together, or I didn't put up Lexan or stuff like that. And I tell you, I've been to robot events all over the world, and I won't name names, but there have been a couple of countries I've been to where I'm like, I do not want to be here. This is really not safe. Somebody's going to die. And I mean, on the humanoid side, it's no big deal. You know, what are you going to do? Slip on the melamine and fall? But on the combat side, I mean, I've seen combat arenas with no polycarbonate at all, just made out of chicken wire. That's it.
Right.
And you're like, no, oh my God, nuts and bolts and shrapnel and everything going fly through that. So, you know, I guess that's my take on it.
So, so I mean, how difficult would it be to have a competition or event and have no paid attendance? Would that be impossible? Would you have to have lots of sponsors in some way to make money?
Well, I mean, at this point, the reason there's no more Robogames is I was still losing money with a huge audience. So the only way to make events happen that big are you really raise the entry fees for the contestants. Like you look at US First, it's like a $5,000 or $6,000 per team entry fee. You look at FIRA or RoboCup, you know, and it's very similar. But generally, those venues are also free, so their charges aren't nearly as expensive because they're not paying $100,000 for a venue. You know, if you're FIRA or RoboCup, often those things happen at universities where, well, you know, FIRA or RoboCup may have to write a smaller check to the university for this space, but probably not anywhere near the kind of check that they'd be writing if it was at, you know, a great big venue. So then disregarding the audience side of the thing, I wouldn't want to put all the contestants in a room together where there's a contagious disease floating around. And so I come in with COVID, for example, and then, you know, I shake your hand, or I'm just sitting by you while your humanoids are doing your stuff, playing soccer or whatever. And then you get COVID from me. So then, okay, maybe we're not infecting an audience, but we're infecting all of the contestants. You know, it's just one of those things where nobody really knows, and I hate prognosticating on that level as to, you know, what the future is going to be like. One of the things that bothers me is the number of people who are talking about vaccines for this. You know, the common cold is a virus, and we've never gotten a vaccine for that. You know, HIV is a virus. We've never gotten a vaccine for that. There is absolutely no certainty that we'll develop a vaccine for that. It's probable, but it's not 100%. And timelines, you know, I mean, consider the fact that we've only really been doing vaccines for about 100 years. You know, humanity's 50,000 years old, and we just figured out the germs existed, what, like 150 odd years ago? The first doctors who talked about washing their hands before surgery were laughed at and scoffed at. You know, it's stuff that you and I now take for granted.
Right. So I guess the thing too is, so as you as a event promoter or organizer would be worried about people getting COVID. I think the other thing is you'd have to almost convince the attendees or the audience that shows up that they would be safe. So I don't know if there's, you know, that interesting dynamic as we start opening up, if anybody actually shows up to anything.
Yeah, I think you're gonna see an inverse bell curve where there's going to be the people who stay at home and a whole lot of people who go out, but there's probably not going to be a lot of middle ground.
Right.
If there was a way to do that. Now, I know just in reading about the number of like Asian countries where there they're letting up on restrictions, but they've introduced new things, you know, like where there's, you know, temperature scanners at every doorway, so they scan the temperatures of you know, the body temperatures. Um, I have no idea how effective that is, though. You know, like me personally, I rarely get a fever, no matter how sick I am. It doesn't mean that I'm not contagious. It just means that I don't get fevers. You, as an example, maybe you run hot. Maybe you're just, you know, the whole 98.6 Fahrenheit thing isn't an absolute. So maybe Mike Overstreet, just his normal day-to-day temperature is 99.5, you know, and you don't think anything about that, but it registers on the FLIR that, hey, Mike's hot, so you don't get to go in. And so here, you're not a carrier. You get, you don't get to come in, but then I am a carrier, for example, but I'm just not showing a temperature, and I do get to go in. I don't know.
That's an interesting point. So, okay, so if you have like temperature sensors at all the events, so I just bought so I've been planning to go to an event for months. I bought my airplane ticket. I got a hotel room, and I'm feeling fine. I get to the hotel room, and then the next day I go to the event, and I'm running a slight temperature, and then I'm denied access to the event. And then what do? I've spent all this money to go to an event, and I can't go in because I'm running, a slight temperature.
Yeah, and you know, that's one of those things that it's going to have to be decided. Like at Robogames, there were a couple of years where I had you guys sign contracts, and most years I didn't. And most of those contracts, even then, were just for like, hey, I can show your picture anywhere I want without having to let you know. So I think things are going to get refined, and there'll be more details. And it's event going to be, it's just like a restaurant. What one restaurant does isn't necessarily what another restaurant does. So maybe one event offers, says, hey, if you show up and you've got a fever, you can't come in, but we'll give you your money back, versus another one that says, hey, if you show up with a fever, you're not getting anything back. And then is it the event organizer's responsibility to refund your airfare because you got sick? That's going to have to, go out into the larger thing, which is what happens if you got any other sickness. I'm not responsible for your airtel or your hotel fees. That's on the hotel and the airline. And so that's just, eventually, I think the only good thing that will come out in terms of large scale events is better communication, I think, as far as what the expectations of the event organizers are and what the expectations of the contestants and the attendees are, in terms of whether or not you get your money back, what happens if it gets canceled, what happens if you're booted from the door, how much you're liable for. What about event organizers? Like for me to rent every time I've rented a venue, there's basically all of the contracts say the same thing, which is basically 180 days out, you get 90% refund. 90 days out, you get like 25% refund. 30 days out, you get nothing, as far as canceling the event goes. So event organizers are going to be just as frequently screwed by this situation as the audience members and contestants and things like that. Legally, and I'm not a lawyer, but there are two lines usually in big contracts like that: force majeure and acts of God. So acts of God are defined as tornadoes, hurricanes, volcanoes, things like that. Force majeure is like acts of God, but it's more like 9/11 would be considered a contractual force majeure if you couldn't make it because the airlines couldn't fly because the FAA stopped the airlines. So that's not an act of God, and it's not even act of, the planes being flown into the Twin Towers. It's that the FAA shut down all of the airlines, so the airlines couldn't fly, which is why you couldn't fly. And in that case, standard contracts say that you're not responsible you, the event organizer, or the airline or hotel or whatever, aren't responsible under terms of force majeure. That's a pretty standard contract thing, because it's not the event organizers or the hotels or the airline's fault that the event is canceled. It's the FAA's fault.
Hmm. So that brings up, that's an interesting point. I'm glad you were talking about that, because with COVID and stuff like COVID, so let's say California right now is doing really well, and let's say California keeps doing really well, and you decide, or anybody decides to schedule an event in California, and then a week or two before the event, there's an outbreak in the very city you're having your event at. What happens? You just basically have to cancel the event, because the authorities will step in and say, hey, we can't have events larger than maybe 10 or 15 people, and your events, you're done with your event. And like you said, unless you have modified the contract to, unless pandemics are act of God, I don't know, you might be out your money then, right?
Oh, you would be, yeah. So as I understand the laws, what would happen is the pandemic would be considered an act of God, but the state shutting down the venue would be force majeure.
Oh.
So they're two separate things. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but I've signed a ton of contracts with those two terms in them. And I do have a very good contract lawyer, and she and I go over every contract I've ever signed. We don't talk about force majeure and act of God anymore, because it's just been so long, but that's how I understand it, is that if the event gets, well, let's say we're having an event and I, the event promoter, get COVID, and enough of the staff gets COVID, that the event's shut down, not because the state says so, but because we can't put on the event because we're all sick in the hospital. That would actually fall, in my understanding, under act of God, that we all got sick. It wasn't our fault that we got sick. Nobody told us not to put on the event, but it became infeasible to put on the event because we're all in the hospital. So many people such that the event couldn't happen. Versus I'm fine, you're fine, everybody's fine, but the city shuts it down, then that's force majeure. Now, if the city doesn't shut it down and there's no active COVID sufficient that the city shuts it down, and I just stop the event, then, as I understand it, I'm more legally responsible for damages to you. Does all that make sense?
Yeah. Huh. Wow. I just thought this would be kind of cool just to talk about this, but this has been a lot more informative.
Yeah, I learned, founding Robogames, I learned so much that had nothing to do with robots. You know, I now have a forklift license. I have a scissor lift license. I know all of the rules on interstate transit, how much weight I can put on a flatbed trailer, how I have to distribute that weight, which is something I didn't learn for the first couple of years when we got busted at a toll station, way station. And they had to remove a whole bunch of the arena from one side of the truck because the truck wasn't loaded evenly. It's not, you know, I didn't know that. Now I know, you know, and there's reasons for that. Like if a truck's going around a steep grade, you know, and you're loaded too heavy on one side, the bed might flip, which is common sense when you think about it. But a lot of people don't think about that. They're not thinking about, you know, the truck going 65 miles down an hour down the highway and rolling. People are thinking about, I got to put this stuff on the truck so the trucker can get out of here and I can go home.
Cool. So we've been kind of rambling on about this topic for a while. So kind of conclude this one topic. So I know you don't have a crystal ball, but in your opinion, do you think there's going to be any large events between now and the end of the year? When do you think you're going to see, is CES? CES is a great example. I'd be scared to go to CES because of all the people from all over the world showing up to an event.
And events like that is more so than Robogames, for example. They get really hot. Like people are sweating. Like big events like CES that I've been at, like I invariably have to change clothes once a day because I get so hot personally. I'm just get sweaty. I don't know if everybody else does. So yeah, and I mean, consider, South by Southwest has already been canceled. And there are a lot of, the Foo Fighters had a summer tour, got canceled. Motley Crue had a summer tour that got canceled. And that's just, I mean, part of that is being a good business person in a bad situation, which is, let's say for example, that there was going to be a Robogames scheduled for June 17th of this year. Okay. I would have already canceled it at this point, because you can't run an event on hope. I mean, granted, I did for 15 years, but it was a different kind of hope. That the infections aren't going to be there. You run the event based on your best case scenario. And right now, if I had rented a venue for this June to do an event, yeah, I would have had to cancel it. I hate that, because in show business, and again, I'm more of a showman than I am a roboticist. The show must go on. I mean, Simone and I have joked that I want that on my gravestone, is the show better be going on after I'm dead. So show people hate canceling shows. That's why you have understudies. If you're on stage in the theater, that's why you always have backups. We'd have, on the combat side of the fence at Robogames, we had 4 kegs that had flamethrowers attached to them, and they were super easy to charge, and they couldn't take any real damage because they were just flamethrowers. And when things got really slow on the combat side of the house, we'd grab 2 of those kegs, grab 2 random audience members, put marshmallows on the back of the kegs, and the goal was that the 2 kegs try to drive around each other and light each other's marshmallows on fire. And I did that in everyone's best interest, because it wasn't really like to give the opportunity to the audience members to drive stuff. It was fill time. That sometimes, it's like, oh my God, we got an hour-long break, we're going to lose the audience. I hate that. I mean, even though, and it doesn't cost me anything to lose an audience. What you pay to get in, I've got your $15 or $20 that you paid for admission. But I want to keep you there. I want to keep the audience there to the very, very end, so you see the best fights, and we put on as good of a show as possible. But in any kind of sports, sometimes you just, what happens when the quarterback, leg gets snapped in half and he's got to get taken off the field? That's when the cheerleaders come out and they do weird cheers and stuff. You got to have that backup plan, which we always did. Some sort of backup plan to make sure that the show went on. But with these kinds of things, you don't know how to keep the show going.
So, okay, like I said, I know you don't have a crystal ball. So you, let's say you have an event, a book reading contest event, and it sounds like you would probably had canceled it for this year. Would you, what kind of planning would you do for next year? Would you just go full steam and plan it and hope for the best, and then maybe cancel it a couple months out, or would you even do anything next year?
So for a book reading event, consider 2 different options. So book reading events versus a sporting event. A book reading event, whether it's small or large, can happen any time of year. Okay. So if I do a book reading or book sales event, it doesn't matter too much to the people coming what the timing is. Generally you need like 2 months advance warning is a good idea. But you can just show up in 2 months with a book in hand. The thing with robot events that was always problematic, and I always had to program around, is I can't just announce an event and say, okay, let's say there's a cure for COVID tomorrow. Cure and a vaccine magically appears tomorrow. In robot events, you still can't just say, oh, hey, we're going to reschedule the event for a month from today, because all of the guys who build robots need so much prep time. My rule was I would never announce an event with less than 6 months on the clock. And generally I'd go for 10 or 11 months, and the sweet spot for robot events is the end of April. And it will always be. Guys like you and me, we're old, not like ancient, but we're out of college, we're out of high school, we've got day jobs. So it really doesn't matter what time of year for us to go to Robogames. However, 40% of Robogames contestants were high school or college students. The only time after many, many, many years of trial and error, the sweet spot is the end of April. Like, we used to do it in June, if you remember, and I got so many complaints from college teams that they can't do it during the summer because a lot of college teams operate on school funding. So it's not the college kids that are paying for their airfare, or maybe they're paying half their airfare and then the school picks up the other half, but they'll only do that during, college hours. If I did it in, say, November, then a lot of those college teams wouldn't have finished their robots yet to be able to bring them to the event. So April is the sweet spot, and any later than April, then you're bumping up against finals weeks. And so then all these college teams can't go because they've got to do finals and they got to finish other projects. So the third weekend in April was a very specifically planned and decided upon time for Robogames to happen year after year, simply for all of the college and high school teams. Is that's the sweet spot when their projects are done, when they've got the time, they've got the money, but they're not backing up against exams or summer break.
Oh, this is another question that I think that you could be good at answering. So on your events, you always get lots of sponsors. Do you think it's going to be hard to get sponsors right now for event?
I never got lots of sponsors. I mean, I get,
you got
500. I got some, $500 here, $1,000 there, but I never got really big sponsors. And I can't answer any questions on sponsorship, not because I don't want to, but because it is a religion that I just never figured out. I knew tiny little events that would rustle up 50 grand, no problem. And Robogames, after 15 years of doing the events, I still couldn't get any big time sponsors. There's something about those sales, and it's magical. If you're on TV, it becomes a whole different ball game, and then it's really easy to get sponsors. So that's a night and day difference.
Okay, so if I kind of get what you're saying is that this year you probably just cancel your event, and you might start planning for next year, but it's you never know. So I don't know. Maybe I'm talking. Would you actually plan an event for next year?
I'm not planning any more Robogames events. So,
but I mean, if you had an event, would you do an event next year?
What I would do. So here's the normal event planning procedure. Let's say, Mike, you're going to start an event in Kansas City. So first you go venue shopping. As you know, we've gone through 3 different venues: Fort Mason, San Mateo, and Alameda Fairgrounds. Just so you know, because this is really just you and me talking, but so I loved Fort Mason. Fort Mason had a rule change, which was we had to use outside electrical rather than in-house electrical. And we own all of what are called the spider boxes. So those things that you trip over that, draw all the amps and then branch out. And they're called spider boxes because you have this big box and then, 8 gangly black power cords coming out of them. Renting spider boxes for an event like ours is honestly about a $10,000 or a $15,000 expense. We own all of that stuff, so I wasn't going to rent it. So basically, we got priced out of San Mateo, or we got priced out of Fort Mason. Then we went to San Mateo. San Mateo was absolutely great. I have no complaints. They were great in all regards. The reason we moved from San Mateo to Alameda Fairgrounds is because Alameda County came to me out of the blue. So I did get one big sponsor, which was Alameda County. And they realized how cool Robogames was. And so the 3 years we did at Alameda County is because they sponsored us for, depending on the year, and there were it wasn't a cut and dry one-time check. It was like 3 checks per year based on different things that we had to hit. So, and I'll just be honest with you, it was $30,000 flat. And then if you remember, we were always bugging everybody about hotel rooms.
Right.
So then we got a small stipend based on how many hotel room nights we filled. And so Alameda County was looking at it basically as a revenue stream of Robogames pulls in about 1,000 contestants from around the world, many of whom will stay for a full week. So we're going to get all this revenue, not only in hotels, but restaurants, and then, you know, sideline revenue of Shibata flies in from Japan, does Robogames for 3 days, but then wants to, you know, check out the sites, go wine touring in Alameda County or go to San Francisco or whatever. There's a big economic impact there. So that was why we changed from San Mateo to Alameda was, and I even asked San Mateo, I'm like, can you match this? And they're like, nope. So I'm not going to turn down $30,000. So there's basically 3 levels of getting a venue. So you, Mike, if you wanted a venue in Kansas City, first you'd go venue shopping, okay? And you'd find venues that meet all of your needs, or most of them. So the space, the amperage, what your budget is, not just for the site, but all of the secondary stuff, because Robogames would cost about $150,000 to run. Generally, the venues were only about $40,000 to $60,000. All the extra money was all the other stuff that we had to rent, buy, or people that we paid. So you'd figure all that out. You go look for the proper venue. And then they do what's called a penciling in, which is you find your right venue. Let's say it's, you know, the Kansas City Fairgrounds. So you find Kansas City Fairgrounds, building A, for example. And you sit down with them, and they all use the same calendaring software. They look at all of their buildings and their availability. So then you'd have to figure out what your move-in times were and your move-out times were. So for Robogames, we'd have 3 days move-in, and you were always there early, so you kind of know this. So we'd have 3 days move-in, 3-day event, and then 2-day move-out. So you'd look at that, and they charge different rates for move-in, move-out days versus show days. So then they'd pencil you in once you and they agreed on a date range. So now you're penciled in. You haven't written a check yet, but you can generally in good faith make an announcement. Hi, everybody. I'm doing, you know, a robot event at Kansas City Fairgrounds on, I'm just going to say April 1st. So people can start planning. Okay. After you're penciled in, they generate a contract. They email you the PDF. If you're smart, you take it to a lawyer, you look over things. You might change minor things on the contract. We change a few things, but, you know, nothing big. Usually we'd put stuff in which said we can't be penalized for using our own electrical equipment, stuff like that. So basically we were adding things to the contract rather than subtracting things. Okay, so now you've signed your contract. Generally on date of signing, depending on the venue, you owe between 10 and 50% down. So for round figures, let's say the venue is $40,000. I like that because it divides easily into quarters. Now you have to get all your other ducks in a row, you know, organizing hotels for you and the staff, a hotel discount for contestants. You've got to market the hell out of the event. Like by the end of Robogames, we didn't really do much marketing. I remember in the early years, just getting no sleep and emailing every reporter I could find whenever I found any report. If I was just reading a news article about robotics or technology or competitions or things, I'd always save the email address of that writer. So, and then send them the spam of like, hey, here's our press release, as well as, you know, other things. The next step of renting a venue before you can put on the event is you have to show proof of insurance. Generally speaking, everybody in the States requires what's called 3+1, which is you need a $3 million liability policy in $1 million increments, which basically means that if anybody gets sued, we're covered for up to $3 million total in $1 million increments. So the insurance company, if I sue you and Fred sues you and Chris sues you, the insurance would only cover up to $1 million. But then if Jane sued you and the insurance company already paid out the $1 million to the 3 people, and Jane would get nothing. I never got sued or had to do anything insurance-wise, but that's how it works. But no venue will give you the keys without your insurance certificate, which is not one of those things you can forge. You know, it's like getting a mortgage or other thing. It's a very official document. You know, it comes from the insurance company directly. And insurance is another interesting thing in terms of the longer you've been doing events, the lower your insurance goes. It's a whole lot like car insurance. When you're 18 years old, car insurance is really expensive. When you've been driving for 15 years with a perfect record, not one single claim against your insurance policy, it goes down a lot. And that's a whole other thing. Boy, I could tell you, I could talk for hours about insurance contracts and how we've only ever used 2 insurance companies. We used one for the first 2 or 3 years, and then we switched because it was a much better insurance company. And oh my God, the forms you'd have to fill out for event, like, is there going to be alcohol served at the event, whether I'm serving it or the venue is serving it? Is it hard alcohol or is it beer, wine only? Like when they found out we had flames at the event, these, huge phone calls, and this was really training our insurance company, which is Gales Creek Insurance, which is probably the biggest event insurance company in the world. And so Gales Creek, basically we had to show them what we were doing with fire and how it was contained. Because at first they're like, oh, fuck no, we're not even going to insure you, period. Just no dollar amount will get you a policy. Showed them pictures of, the fire in the arena, letters from the fire marshal. You weren't there, but we did a private show for Sony down in San Jose with fire, a lot of robot combat fire. And I mean, Mike, you've known me for a lot of years. I'm not a suck up. I'm not a kiss ass. But dude, when I'm around a fire marshal, I am at military parade res. It's yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. Because cops can't really shut an event down. A fire marshal can shut you down in a millisecond. So the San Jose Fire Department was there for, set up a walkthrough and everything in the show. They literally rewrote the fire code around us. And so I have this great contact in San Jose, and also the fire marshal from San Mateo, where Robogames was for the longest. And we just always did good. They're like, yeah. Okay, these guys play with fire. They totally play with fire, but it's contained, and it's within the fire code of most counties because we're just using propane or butane or isopropanol, and they're in 8-ounce cylinders. So it looks very scary on television or video or whatever, the poof as the fires go up. But as far as the firemen go, they're like, oh, that's not real fire. That's just play fire. Believe it or not, a fireman said that to me. So going back to the insurance thing. So then, then we had to convince the insurance company that, hey, the fire's not so bad. Then there's, audience estimates. So, a policy for 1,000 people and a policy for 3,000 people. The 3,000 person policy isn't 3 times as expensive as the 1,000 person policy, but it can be like almost twice as expensive. So there's a lot of cushioning on that, how many employees you have. So anyways, I think our insurance policies generally ran us about $5,000 for a show, give or take. So now you've got your insurance certificate. You have to pay the venue in advance. There's all these starry-eyed kids who try to do events. They're like, we'll pay you after the event. It's like, venues are way too smart. like, no, no. But I'm going to make so much money. No. Because there's all these events that wildly undersell. And so they can't afford the venue. So there's no way a venue is going to give you the venue until you've paid everything off. Then you move in. After years, eventually you get, like, we had such a great relationship with Alameda County, and we've had such a terrible relationship we had a great relationship with San Mateo and a terrible relationship with Alameda. Had I continued to do Robogames, we would have brought it back to San Mateo, because in the end, believe it or not, the $30,000 that Alameda County was fronting us wasn't coming out because we were getting a lot more audience in San Mateo, A, and B, the staff at Alameda Fairgrounds are idiots and assholes, and you can push this out on the internet, but God, they're just jerks. And so I even told, and the county was sponsoring us, which is a different organization, because we were like the economic development, some under the economic development was the people who sponsored us at the county level. And the fairgrounds are actually run by a totally independent organization. The only deal was we had to do it in Alameda County, and that was the only place in Alameda County that we could do it. And so it just wasn't worth it. And that's another thing that in finding a venue to do an event, you need to do is find a venue that not just works in terms of the size, the space, the power capabilities, all of that stuff. You have to find, like, the compatible humans. I don't think you ever came to one of the Barbot events, did you?
No, unfortunately not.
So as good of our relationship was with, like, Fort Mason and San Mateo, we couldn't do Barbot events there. Like, there was just too many contractual issues with us serving the alcohol. So I hate using marketing terms, but it wasn't a good fit. Whereas then we found these other venues, which were great fits, especially because we weren't doing 3,000 people a day. We do like 500 people a night, and most of them would pop in for a drink or two, and then they'd pop out. It wasn't like an all-night thing. So venues are going to vary based on what you're doing and what you're comfortable with.
So let me phrase this. So if I was thinking about doing an event like you were talking about, and I had you on as an advisor, what would you recommend? Would you say, hey, Mike, that's a lot of work, that's a lot of effort, that's a lot of money up front that you're going to be putting up? Would you recommend that I would do an event for next year?
Well, it depends on what kind of event. So it's really going to depend on the type of event. Like Barbot, I don't even know why we don't do Barbot anymore, because we made a ton of money, we had a ton of fun, and it was a very easy show to do. Most of our Barbot events, honest to God, made more money than Robogames. Robogames, 1,000 contestants, 7,000 people through the doors over the course of the 3 days, as far as audience members go. We'd be lucky to clear $10,000. Just the economics it was always a break-even point. And all of that work of setting up the arena, dealing with 1,000 contestants and all of those aspects, tearing down the arena, blah, 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 blah. Barbot, we'd show up the day of the event, because it was usually like a 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. event. We'd show up at like 9 a.m., set it up from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., open the doors. It was basically then a bar, and then the next day we just come in and take everything out. Super easy. So that was a great event to do. Robogames, dude, that was a soul-sucking hell for me. I'm thrilled, like one of the things you said in our conversation earlier was how many friends you made through Robogames. That was one of my first goals with Robogames. Was prior to Robogames, I had worked at BattleBots, RoboCup, FIRA, International Robot Sumo Tournament, all sorts, what was K1? Robo1. I'd gone to Japan for Robo One. All these other events, and none of these robot people knew of each other. The sumo guys have been around for like 50 years, I think. It's ridiculous. Like since the 70s, they've been doing that. They didn't even know about, humanoid robots. I brought like a KHR-1 one year to Japan, and they're like, "Oh my God, where'd you get that?" I'm like, "Down the street from here, dude. What are you talking about? So the first goal was always to cross-pollinate, so that a guy like you, and I bet that happened. Like when you first came to Robogames, were you humanoid your first year? I
Yes.
presume. Yeah.
Yes. Robo Nova, bro. Yeah, from High Tech.
Right. Oh, because did you play soccer with us?
I think so. I think I got roped in. I got dragged into playing soccer.
Dragged in is probably the appropriate term.
Yeah.
But you eventually found other stuff to do, right? Because of Robogames. So that was, the real cross-pollination thing, was to get the combat guys to learn more about AI, to get the sumo guys to learn more about rigidity, to get the humanoid guys to learn more about AI, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that was a brilliant success. The second thing was to give everybody medals equally weighted, so that if you're a little kid in the Lego event, you get the same medal as the guy who had a 220-pound combat robot. And that was very much based on the Olympic model of, okay, so, and I always fall back on Winter Olympics. I never think about Summer Olympics. So my examples are always Winter Olympics. So, downhill skiing is a really big event, and everybody watches that. Whereas curling, nobody really watches. I mean, it's gotten kind of popular the last couple of years, but realistically, curling isn't a big draw. Hockey, huge. Skeleton, nobody watches skeleton. I watch skeleton, but I'm a winter sports person. But they all get the same medals. They all get treated the same. When the U.S. sends a dream team to play hockey and gets silver for, hockey, that's the same medal that, you would get for doing, what skeleton is?
I mean, I maybe you should explain it, because I don't.
It's like bobsledding, only way the fuck more dangerous and with almost nothing underneath.
Yeah.
Basically, they use almost identical bobsled track. It's just that you're basically on two little razor blades, laying down and looking down like this at your feet. So that everybody got treated equally.
What I always thought was really cool is that I was a huge Star Wars fan. So when everybody got the medal, you had the Star Wars ceremony. I always thought that always made my weekend if I could just do that once.
Good, because that's what was totally, I had a friend who's a music mixer, because if you listen to actually it's called the Throne Room,
Right.
is the actual title of the track. It segs immediately into the Star Wars anthem. And so I had to have a guy trim it down, because the way it's originally recorded, you can't just hard stop it between those two. And he was like, "Is George Lucas going to sue you?" I'm like, "I don't care." But yeah, I'm glad you noticed that, because that was one of those things that I put a lot of time into to make happen. And it's one of those 50-50 things of the medal ceremonies. I always wish just could have been much more dramatic and big and splendid.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, it's nothing because of you, but unfortunately, it was always at the last minute on Sunday. Everybody wants to leave, so you just do bang, 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 get the ceremonies out, medal ceremonies out of the way, so people can go home. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the weirdest things, and it happened every year, not to you, because you're there for the duration, but we'd always have people who'd leave without collecting a medal, without going to the ceremony, who'd disappear, right, because we would always try to have the ceremony immediately after the event. So whatever the final was, we would try, not always succeed, but try to do the ceremony right after the event happened. And in my garage, there has to be 40 medals over the years in envelopes, just, like third place, sumo. And the people didn't pick them up. Some people didn't care. And then there are guys like Nick Donaldson, who was just a medal slut, and made sure he got every medal possible and never took them off his neck until Monday morning, which I was cool with.
So I don't want to take all of your time, but this has been a lot of fun. So do you have one or two, just depending on how much time you have, or three really cool stories? Something that happened, because I never could. I got so busy at my events, it was hard for me to walk around and see all the cool stuff going around. Is there something that just stood out, like you thought was super cool or funny or whatever, that you can share?
Yeah, I'll preface it with, I don't have as many stories as I would like, because usually I was in the office trying to keep everything from falling apart and not getting to see the cool parts. Which is one reason why, when you were asking me, should I do an event? What's then like, well, be careful, because it's really easy to fall into hate with the event that you started because things are just going wrong. And it's not really any one person's fault. It's just cascading effects. Anyways, I remember it's probably 2005 or 2006. BattleBots had gone off the air in 2002. We'd taken up their spot as far as the home of robot combat. And Paul Ventimiglia, who at the time was probably 15 or 16, had flown in from the East Coast, grown up watching BattleBots, was a huge BattleBots fan, built his first combat robot, first or second combat robot. And he was fighting Carlo Bertoncini, who was, at that point, I think, the all-time winningest robot combat builder driver in history. And Carlo only, I think if you go to botrank.com, Carlo is still ranked third or fourth in all-time wins. And so, as happens with a lot of events, we went way late. So it was either Friday or Saturday. It definitely wasn't Sunday. 11 o'clock, and Carlo fights Paul, 11 o'clock Pacific time. And Paul had an undercutter and just devastated Carlo, it destroyed the robot. Carlo, after 3 or 4 years of robot wars and 5 years of BattleBots, had suffered 2 or 3 defeats. He'd I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like he was 40-3. That was his win-loss record or something. And Paul gets in there with his very low budget, because Carlo was moneyed. Carlo didn't have to, dig through the couch cushions to find the money to build his robots. He had the money. Paul, on the other hand, he's like a 16-year-old kid, and it's a very scrappy little robot, and there's lots of problems with it. But he just decimates him. And all the audience had gone, which was heartbreaking, but it is what it is. Hold on, the dog's beating me up. Give me a second.
Okay, no problem. Pets. Technical difficulties.
Yeah. Go to bed. Go to bed. No. I do love you.
I've been so lucky that my cat hasn't jumped on the table.
You can't quite see Jack, but he's...
Yeah, everybody needs a dog or a cat.
I totally agree. I could not. Simone even says to me, at least once a week, how do people live without pets? And I agree with her. I'm like, I don't know. So anyway, usually when I tell this story, I actually cry because it was so moving. So Paul never expected to beat Carlo. He didn't. That never entered his mind. He was just happy to be there. He was literally one of those contestants who's just happy to be there. And he was thrilled to go up against Carlo, just to shake his hand, you know, and stand on the platform next to him. Hey, dude, no, go to bed. Go to mama. Go to mama. And he wins, and he calls his dad. Oh, it was just after midnight. This is like 15 years ago, so forgive me. It was just after midnight when the fight had ended. It's like 12:03 or something. And Paul calls his dad, and I can never convey the amount of emotion that was there at that moment in time. Paul calls his dad, and he's like, Dad, I beat Carlo. Oh my God. You know, Paul's crying, and you can hear his dad crying on the phone, and I'm crying, and everybody's crying. And Carlo is crying too, but for a very different reason. That was one of the years where we offered and paid a big prize. That was $10,000. So it was $10,000 for the winner. Paul didn't win that year, but he won the next year. So it would have been 2005. So yes, it was 2005. And it was very emotional because just like any other sport, and all robot sports, not just combat, but you with humanoid and firefighting and everybody else, I consider it a sport, a true sport, and fuck anybody who thinks otherwise. So just like, you know, the kid who grew up watching baseball and always followed, I mean, I grew up in Minnesota, so all of my baseball analogies fall back on old Twins stuff. So he grew up loving Kirby Puckett, if you know who Kirby Puckett was. You know, grows up, gets to play baseball, and then all of a sudden there he is, you know, on the mound pitching against Kirby Puckett. You know, and all of the emotions of like, you never really think you're going to get there. You know, it's your dream, but you're not really sure if it's going to happen or not. And there you are pitching against Kirby Puckett, you know, as like a 20-year-old kid pitching against this, you know, say 36-year-old veteran or something. And that's really cool. It was 2 years ago. Well, when I say 2 years ago, so it was the second before last Robogames. Ant weight robots, the 1-pound combat robots, have gotten exponentially better over the years, but it's still a predominantly adult event. We have a separate kids event, but there's also an adult event. And 2 years ago, first, second, and third place were all taken by prepubescent kids. They were like 12, and then was the first place. It was a little girl. Well, you know, Rob Farrow, who helps organize Robogames. Yeah. So his daughter took first or second, and then two twins who were also from the Washington area, twin boys, took either first and third or second and third. I don't remember which way it happened. And all three of these were fighting in the adult league against guys who'd spent, you know, thousands of dollars. And the kids just won because they were better. They were better drivers, better contestants, you know, and oddly way less emotional, because like when adults, there's this inverse relationship to how much money you spend on a robot and how emotional you get when you lose. And it's really funny because people who spend like $20,000, $30,000 on a robot, humanoid, whatever, when they lose, they tend to do so graciously. And my guess is because they've been trained by failing in all of their iterations of building robots. They've gotten more humble because they recognize, shit, that happened again. Mm-hmm. You know? Whereas the really snotty adults who come in the first year, you know, and they're adults so they can write the check. So they buy all the best parts, you know, and they put a robot together. And then they lose to whether it's another adult or a little kid. They tend to be very poor losers. And especially people who've put in almost no money, they're the worst losers of all. And I don't get that. It's like, well, if you only spent $100 on your robot, did you really expect, you know, to win against 31 other people with years of experience and tens of thousands of dollars or stuff? So, and even those three kids, they were really happy, but they were just happy as little kids. They weren't bouncing off the wall or anything. I guess they were gracious winners, is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
But it was really awesome that 3 kids had managed to win against a field of adults.
We could almost we could almost do this like every month or so. Just have you think of cool stories and talk about cool things, because it's like, I think I told you this before many times. It wasn't Robogames. It wasn't competing at Robogames. It's all the people. I can't tell you. I've lost track. I'd have to like sit down and actually think about this. But I have so many friends because of Robogames, and these are people I would have never met in my life without Robogames.
I do love you.
I mean, I'm talking people overseas.
No, again, that was my first goal. It's harder for me to convey that in a single story, other than saying, because that's a really long-term story of all of the people that Mike Overstreet has met over the years because of Robogames. And that honestly was always my number one goal. If you go back and you look at old news footage when I used to put up news footage on the site from, 2004, 2005, 2006, and people say, why did you start this? That was always my answer. My answer was always to, cross-pollinate all the roboticists from around the world and get them to meet each other and ideally build better robots. And so, then, there's just not one single story where I can tell you that. But you are one of the success stories, and there's so many others, that did that. Okay, here's one. So because of Robogames, I got to travel around the world. I was doing so already before. Would you two knock it off? But because of Robogames, I get invited to a lot of other robot competitions around the world. And so I went to one in Mexico, which is where they had the chicken wire combat arena, just terrifying. But it wasn't a combat story. There were a lot of kids. They basically, the Mexico did like super mini Robogames where they had 2 or 3 combat weight classes, and then they had like a humanoid running, and they had sumo, and then they had an open. And the reason I did the open, which wasn't the first year, the first year we did Robogames, I had a couple of complaints. Believe me, this is going somewhere. It is actually going somewhere. So when we first did Robogames, the very first year when it was Robo Olympics, and I couldn't do every possible robot competition, so I think I just picked 50 to be even across weight classes, so like, there's 10 combat competitions and 3 humanoid competitions, which grew, and 5 weight classes of sumo or whatever. But anyways, so a couple of people had made the comment after the first event, I really wish there was an event where I could show off blank, because they had this cool robot. And it just didn't fit into any class. And so that's when I came up with the open, which was any robot that is just cool can compete in the open. And even if you're competing in something else, if you've got a humanoid, and several humanoids over the years would compete in the open. Sometimes they won, sometimes they didn't. And so I'm in Mexico, and this was this was after Emma was born. If you ever become a father, you'll find that you track time based on, where your kids are in life. So, so this was probably about 2010. We go down to Mexico. And so there's this guy, and he's got a work in progress, and he shows it to me. And it's a keyboard, piano playing hand. And so he's trying to program a single hand to play the keyboard. And he asks me for advice. And it's the same advice that almost everybody gets across any field, not just robotics, but like if you're a writer or a musician or whatever. And I looked at him, I said, just finish it. My advice is not which servo to use or how fast to make it or what song to do. Finish it. Just get it working. Don't be a perfectionist. Don't make it perfect. Just get it working. And he came up. We were still at San Mateo because I've actually got a picture on my monitor. I don't know how to share it, but it's one of my favorite pictures, and I keep it like on my monitor because I love it so much. See if I can figure out how to share it with you.
Hopefully, you got the share option.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Here, I'll finish the story. I'll finish the story because if I'm looking for it, I'm going to do a shitty job of telling the story. So, anyways, he I don't remember this. This is very important. I talked to like 100 different kids at this event. Totally forget about it. Fast forward 3 years, or at Robogames. And this was definitely at San Mateo. And he comes up, and so this kid comes up to me. When I say kid, I mean, you and I are older. So when I say kid, 22, 23, I don't know. 22-year-old comes up to me. He's like, Mr. Calkins. And I'm like, oh, he's like, I want to show you my robot. And I'm like, dude, I love you. I don't know who you are, but I just can't look at everybody's robot in this building. I just don't have time. And I think that was even Saturday too, which is always the worst day for me for Robogames. And he said, but my robot is only here because of you. And I'm like, well, everybody's robot's only here because of me. And he's like, no, come here. And he comes and he shows me, and that's when I remembered who he was. So he comes up into the aisle. So if you remember the San Mateo building, when you'd first walk in, you'd break, if you're looking through the doors, you'd turn to your left to go to your pits. But we'd have on that left side of the building would be where humanoids and sumo and stuff were. But on the right side would be where the art bots and stuff would be. And then the combat would always be the milk in the back of the store, but you have to walk by everything else before. So then I had to walk to the other side of the house into the art bot section. And there he's got, a regular, electronic keyboard thing in his hand. And then he pushes go, and it plays Tune for Release or something. I don't remember. And then he cries and he says, I dreamt about this for many, many years, even before you came to Mexico. And I never really thought that it would come true, that this would be my dream, that my dream would come true. But here I am. And because you told me, just finish it and don't worry about, it being perfect. And especially you, because humanoids are always the worst. There's never going to be a perfect humanoid ever, or any kind of walking thing. So everybody wants it perfect, and it's so easy to get sucked into how do I make my thing perfect, at the risk of not ever completing it because you're trying so hard. There's this old line that perfection is the enemy of completion, which I found to be true. It was like in most of my projects, I call it the 90% rule, which is most of my projects only ever end up 90% completed, because it's not perfect. And then I get frustrated and I don't even finish it. So this kid actually learned the rule that I've yet to learn, which was completing it. And he said, I only completed it. And he says, and it doesn't even work, perfectly, but I don't care. I'm here and I get to see all these other people and I get to meet all these other people. And thank you. And then I cried. And it was very touching because he was very sincere in just you gave me the motivation and the direction to, not technically, but just emotionally to complete this. Do you remember Rodi Hartino?
Yeah, that name sounds familiar, yes.
So he competed in firefighting, maze solving, Indonesian. It's one of those bricks that was the sweetest, gentlest person, but you knew if he punched you, you just he'd shatter your jaw. And he had super long hair and just looked like an old school US hippie, but he's from Indonesia. And he came here. Remember Tony Percanis? Little kid.
There's lots to, yeah. I met so many people. It's like, so I just sit down and like, just think about all the people I met,
So
what they did and who they are.
anyway, they were firefighting competitions.
Right.
And Tony came in the first year, and there weren't many firefighting robots competing. There were like 4 or 5 the first year. And all of them were adults, professional engineers like you and me. I'm not a professional engineer anymore, but anyway, like in their 30s, 40s, or even 50s, professional engineers. And Tony just crushed them in firefighting for the gold medal. And then every year thereafter, Tony won the gold medal. And it became, and I don't think there was another event at Robogames that was that locked up, where after like 3 or 4 years, nobody talked about who was going to win gold. People only talked about who was going to win silver and bronze, because it was a foregone conclusion that Tony was going to win gold. So then the Indonesians came, and Rhodey managed to beat Tony, which was considered, an impossibility. And so Tony took silver. And Rhodey took like a couple other medals that year and the next year. Anyways, he ended up meeting the president of Indonesia, which is like the 4th most populous country in the world. He got lifetime scholarship to his university because he was still only a bachelor's student. But they're like, we're going to pay for everything all the way up to postdoc. We're going to guarantee you, no, I'm not right. We're going to guarantee you a teaching position at the university, all because he won the gold medal at Robogames. There was the Mexican teams for many years would get met by the president of Mexico. The way, the winning Super Bowl or, baseball teams go to the White House, Robogames Mexican winners would get to go to the Mexican White House. And it wasn't just Indonesia or Mexico, like Singapore would have, like official meet and greets, not necessarily at the presidential level, but at other levels. France, when the French teams were coming, they'd like get met by the Minister of Education. It was always frustrating because I couldn't get the lowliest local city board member interested in Robogames in any fashion. But here the Indonesians are and the Mexicans getting presidential receptions, and I can't even squeeze a nickel out of San Francisco coffers. So I think the biggest thing is how many lives I changed. That you made so many friends. Guys like Rodi Hartino did so much. And then there's Zach. Zach was going to drop out of high school, happened to be skateboarding at Fort Mason the first year of Robogames, had enough pocket money to buy a ticket, came in, and you should talk to him because he tells his story way better than I am because it's almost unbelievable. Came in, saw the fights, and he was going to quit high school. He said, that's what I want to do. I want to build robots. Not only stayed in high school, but went from like a DF student to an A student. This sounds totally apocryphal. This sounds like I'm making it up. But he's like, no, that's what I want to do. Put himself through college and came back to Robogames every year. He ended up always running the Antweight competition, and he now has a business which employs like 4 or 5 people. I don't know how it's doing through COVID. But his business is really based off of Robogames. So he has like this small touring Antweight arena that's like 3x3 or 4x4 that fits in a car. And he's got all these Antweight combat robots that can't do any real damage. They're just basically pushy bots. But he also does summer camps for kids. Very successful summer camps where like he's booked out a year in advance for like 2-week blocks throughout the summer. And he's made a good living. I've often joked he's the only person who's made money professionally doing robot combat. And he has, he met his wife at Robogames. They're married. I know of at least 2 children who were conceived at Robogames. So yeah, I mean, we affected a lot of people's lives for the better. And that was always, isn't that everybody's goal? You want to leave the world a better place than you found it?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, before I forget, and not to tell you this, but just listening to you right now, you need to seriously write all this stuff down, or do an audio, a book, or maybe you got friends in TV land. They need to interview you for 20, 30 hours, and they need to put this all together and make a documentary before all this stuff gets forgotten and lost.
It's been I've talked to many documentary crews. Basically, nobody really wants to put any time into it for that level. I actually had 2 book deals. Basically, stop it. I love you. I do. This has been an hour and a half, dude. Yeah. Our new German Shepherd needs endless. He has no idea how lucky he is that I'm home way before COVID. I mean, I think you know this. I've always worked at home. And he just presumes that I'm here for his, go to bed. Go to bed.
I mean, you've been very gracious with your time.
That's okay. Well, we're friends. Honestly, way before COVID, I've been in seclusion, really, since Robogames died. I haven't talked to many people at all. Anyways, I had 2 book deals a long time ago. One was right at the beginning, so say 2006. And then the second one was probably about 2010 or 2011. And both publishers gave up on me because, well, I can sit here and talk to you for about an hour, and we're both kind of running out of steam. I tried to write books about this shit, and I just couldn't do it. Not emotionally, not do it, but just I get really bored with writing, and I'd stop.
I mean, this to me, this is a great format for you. So you could, just set up your phone and just an hour, just talk about Robogames for an hour and just build up. I bet you've got so many stories that you could have 20, 30 hours worth of stories.
Easily. If my memory were better, I'd have a lot more, but my memory sucks. I mean, as it is, Mike, I put up Robogames videos when we hired Grant to do the video and we shot it all pro. I don't know, was that 6 years ago, 5 years ago? Put them all up on YouTube, and they're still all under 1 million. Some of them are barely 10,000 user views, and I just don't know what the magic is. Some idiot, trips over a log, 100 million views. BattleBots posts 20-second outtakes from their fights, 100 million views. I have all of the fights up there for 2 years. Nobody watches them. So you and I think that's great. But in terms of finding that audience, why is it? I mean, that's the zeitgeist that nobody really knows. 1 million people, 1 billion people have Instagram accounts. How come it is that some dorky chick going like this all the time suddenly ends up with, 100 million followers, and she's making $2 million a year just to say, I like root beer. You should drink Weinhardt's root beer. Robogames, 15 years of history. We'd go sponsor shopping, and I couldn't get a nickel.
We can probably talk about social media and online presence and stuff. I don't get it. I don't understand how some people are really popular and some are not. I don't get it.
I don't think anybody gets it. It's just like lottery. So, my daughter has a TikTok account. She's got all of 20 followers. I see some of the people she follows who have, 100 million or 10 million followers or whatever, and their videos are no more compelling than hers. It's strictly winning the lottery of, like when tweets go viral or something, somebody says something funny with 100 followers, and one key follower happens to retweet that, and all of a sudden it explodes. I don't. My wife is a big fan of the Twitter account. We Rate Dogs. I don't know if you know this Twitter account.
I'm more of a cat person, so nah.
It's okay. It's okay. The dogs isn't actually the point. So and this story is extremely codified. Like everybody knows exactly how it went from creation to the behemoth it is now. A guy is sitting at like an Applebee's or something, and he sees a cute dog outside, and he takes a picture of the cute dog. And he's like, "Hey, that's a good dog. I give it an 11 out of 10." And so he creates this Twitter account right then, We Rate Dogs, posts this picture of this dog and says, "Cute dog, I give it an 11 out of 10." And he does that a couple more times, just not thinking about it. All of a sudden, one day, somebody calls him and is like, "Dude, did you see your Twitter account?" And, like one of his posts went to 500,000 and so on and so forth. So now this guy, people just submit their photos of dogs to him and he rates them. And no dog is ever a 10. That's kind of the gag of the account is everybody gets an 11 to 15. And the dude, according to the New York Times, is making something like $300,000 a year net, not gross, just doing this because like people buy t-shirts from him. He has a calendar, and he's not even originating the content anymore. People are sending him all of the photos that he puts up. And he's like, he's got employees working for him now to fend off the sponsorship deals and the other, like, Purina sponsors him and stuff like that. And I remember Simone first telling me about this. It was 4 or 5 years ago. It was one of the weird things where I can remember exactly where we were. We were walking our dogs in our local dog park. We were crossing a bridge because there's an estuary there. And she's like, "Did you hear about We Rate Dogs?" I'm like, "No." And she shows me the thing. And I just remember getting really pissed off. I'm like, how the fuck does this guy have 1 million fucking followers and Robogames still only has 230? What am I doing here? So I don't know. I mean, this is one of those things that kind of gets me pissy and angry, not at you, but just at life. It's like, how come some douchebag taking selfies of himself can get 1 million? How interesting is one person that repetitive selfies, anybody gives a shit, versus, hours of footage of humanoid robots, twerking, doing cartwheels, doing kung fu, all of that shit. And
Autobots, the damage and mayhem and destruction and everybody cheering and can't get enough of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about that just because it annoys me, because I would, the number of people who said, "Oh my God, you should get sponsors." I'm like, thanks. It never occurred to me. Or you should be really rich and famous. I'm like, yeah, I've been trying, but that hasn't worked out too well.
No, I'm serious. You need to figure out a format. I think this is a really good format for you, just sitting there talking on video. But get all these, just kind of sort of write them down and then maybe just talk about them and just maybe spend a half hour to an hour at a spot. And so that, because these are like great, to me, these are great stories.
They are. And they're great for me too. You're just giving me far too much credit as far as my own personal time management goes, because I have shitty time management. So it's not that it's not a good idea. I just know myself well enough to know that I'll do that tomorrow. Ad infinitum.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so we've got about an hour and a half, and your dog probably wants to go out and walk around or something. But
yeah, and Simone's been peeking in with dinner. She doesn't need me. She's just like, it's dinner time.
Right. So I mean, I appreciate
you just asking. I'm always happy to talk to people.
So maybe we talk back and forth and come up with some other topics to talk about. We don't have to do this a lot, just every once in a while. I just, like I said, I'm doing this for me.
That's okay. You
Yeah.
know, it doesn't always have to be for, I mean, halfway through Robogames, I honestly gave up the notion of making a living out of it, which is why I continue to work for Lego. If you didn't know, Lego cut me 3 years ago.
Right.
But uh, but I just, you know, it's like being a ballerina at 30, you know, in your local town. If you're a 30-year-old ballerina, you're not going to be dancing at the Met ever. It's just not going to happen. With Robogames, like halfway through, I'm like, okay, this is not going to fucking ever make any money. But I do get some sense of joy out of it, especially the helping of other people. If you remember the 1 year we went dark, which is, I think, you can't. So here, you've never been to my house?
No, actually, I'm not.
Yeah. Thanks. So
Yeah, all the medals.
yeah. And so I the reason I did that is because I'm looking at the medals to remember what our gap year was. So 2014, 2013, Simone and I said, okay, we're done. And we promised we weren't going to do it anymore. And I realized towards the end of 2014, having not done it that April, and I talked to Ray Billings a lot. I seem to recall that was a conversation with him, which was, so if I do Robogames, I'm miserable for a week out of the year, but I'm really happy for 51 weeks out of the year because I've done this show, this spectacle. And the year we didn't do it, 2014, after like, you know, the year and a half had gone by, I'm like, well, now I'm miserable for 52 weeks out of the year rather than just 1 week out of the year. And so that's why I brought it back for 2015, 16, 17.
18?
We didn't do 18.
We didn't do it. Okay.
No,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
2 years?
So I guess that's right.
Almost 3.
Yeah, well, no, we did do, it would be 3 years ago this last month. So what is that? So we didn't do 2020, we didn't do 2019, we didn't, so 2017 was the last year, I guess. To look that up.
Yeah, I've checked that. Yeah.
By when, no, we did do 2018. All right. Yeah, 2018 was a really bad year for me. But that was the last time we did it. That can't be 2018.
I want to think we did. I was there at 2018.
Sure enough. 2018. Yes, 2018 was last year. I'll show you what I did. This is how disorganized I am. So right next to my desk are still the stacks of the official medal winner forms. So I just dug into the pile. I'm like, oh yeah, 2018.
It's too funny.
Yeah, what was really heartbreaking about the last year, about 2018, was that it was the year I just signed 2 deals for overseas Robogames with Egypt and China. But both of those deals were contingent on continuing to do it in the States, and 2018 was financially the worst year for Robogames. Not to bore you with the details, but like the first 3 or 4 years is all off the top of my head. We lost money, and then the middle was slightly profitable. I mean, it was a good hobby, I mean, it paid for a new roof and stuff, but it was never enough to just quit my job kind of thing. 2017 was okay financially, but 2018, I think I lost about 40,000. So, I mean, to some people, this sounds like a lot of money. To others, it's insignificant. But so the Robogames bank account, I just always kept at $20,000. That was my cushion, which is about what a deposit on a venue is $20,000. So like for San Mateo always came out to be right around $45,000 payment. So if I had $20,000 in the account, I could write down payment for the venue and then float it as all of the contestant registration fees came in. Then that would allow me to pay for the rest of the venue, and then audience member ticket stuff would theoretically be, profitable. But anyways, so even with the 30, 40 grand that I got from Alameda County, by the end of Robogames, the account was completely flat. Like I had to move money from savings just to keep the account open. And credit card debt, which I couldn't expunge, which I normally would, because like I just have credit cards at Robogames that I hand to people. Like, here, this is your credit card for the weekend. I trust you. That's the reason I'm giving you this card. Your job is to buy food. I don't want to hear about it. Don't buy lobster, but make sure everybody's fed. And so, yeah, it was, I think before Robogames started that year, I generally look at the accounts, because we generally sign with the venue May or June, because it was always cycling around at that time. So we'd sign for May or June, and I think like even in October before the last event, there was like 40 grand in the account before I even started taking registration fees or something like that. So when you do all of that math, you're looking at a loss of like $40,000, which I just couldn't possibly afford to do ever again. Especially with the account being flat, I couldn't float the check for the venue. And I already told Alameda that I was never going to work with them again. Because even with the money they gave us, our final bill out of there was $78,000, which is way more than San Mateo would have ever charged us. I mean, the most San Mateo ever charged us was around 50. So that's where it is, If somebody wants to give me, $500,000 or $1 million, and actually somebody offered, we have to stop recording and I'll tell you this story.
Okay. So, yeah, we've gone a long time. I'm surprised Zoom hasn't kicked me out. So,
yeah. I got a notice right at the 1 hour mark that said,
so yeah, I'm gonna stop recording, and so hopefully people learn a lot. I thought this was pretty cool. So I'm going to stop recording now, and hopefully thanks for everybody watching. Thanks, David, for doing this, and bye, everybody.